George pressed his back against the cold concrete wall, phone trembling in his hand. The voices grew louder around the corner. Angry, desperate. He shouldn't be here. He knew that. But curiosity had pulled him down this forgotten corridor of the corporate office building, where he worked as a night janitor. Now, those voices were about to reveal something he was never meant to hear. It started 3 hours earlier. George was mopping the executive floor, headphones in, lost in his usual rhythm. The building was supposed to be empty after 9. That's what they told him. That's what the schedule said. But as he wheeled his cart past conference room D, he noticed something odd. A sliver of light beneath the door. Voices inside. Low, tense, arguing. George stopped. He pulled out one earbud. The voices went silent. His heart jumped. Had they heard him? He waited, frozen, bucket handle digging into his palm. Then the voices resumed, quieter now, more urgent. He couldn't make out words, but the tone sent a chill down his spine. Fear, anger, something dangerous. He should have kept walking. That's what George told himself. Just finish the floor and get out. But something about those voices wouldn't let him go. In 12 years of night shifts, he'd never heard anyone in the building this late. Not on this floor. Not in that room. George pushed his cart past the door, moving slowly, listening. One voice was deep, commanding, the other higher, shaking. A woman. She sounded afraid. The deep voice said something sharp. The woman's voice cracked. Then silence again. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe. These real-life moments don't happen every day. You won't want to miss what comes next. George finished mopping the hallway, but his mind wouldn't settle. Who were they? What were they arguing about? And why did it feel so wrong? He thought about calling security, but what would he say? 2 people talking in a conference room? They'd laugh at him. Tell him to mind his business. But then, as George emptied his bucket in the utility closet, he heard footsteps. Fast, heels clicking against tile. The woman burst out of conference room D and hurried toward the emergency stairwell at the end of the hall. George peeked around the corner just in time to see her face. Pale, tear-streaked, terrified. The door to the stairwell slammed shut. George stood there, mop in hand, pulse hammering in his ears. Then the conference room door opened again. A man stepped out. Tall, expensive suit. Face twisted in frustration. He looked left, then right, scanning the hallway. George ducked back into the closet, holding his breath. The man's footsteps moved in the opposite direction, toward the elevators. George heard the ding of the elevator arriving, the doors sliding open, then closing again. Silence. George's hands were shaking now. Something was very wrong. He thought about the woman's face, the fear in her eyes. He couldn't just leave. Not without knowing. That's when he made the decision that would change everything. George pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and walked toward the stairwell. If something bad was happening, he needed proof. He needed to understand. The stairwell door was heavy. It closed slowly behind him with a low hiss. George looked down. Empty. He looked up. That's when he heard them again. The voices. Echoing from somewhere above. Louder now. More desperate, George started climbing, phone recording, heart pounding so hard it hurt. With each step, the voices grew clearer. He could almost make out words now. The woman was pleading. The man was shouting. Then George reached the 5th-floor landing and froze. Through the small window in the stairwell door, he could see them. Standing in a narrow service corridor he didn't even know existed. The woman backed against the wall. The man towering over her. And between them, something that made George's blood run cold. But it wasn't what they were arguing about that would shock him. It was who else was standing there, watching from the shadows. George's finger hovered over the record button. His phone was already capturing everything through the narrow window, but his hands shook so badly the image blurred. He steadied himself against the doorframe, trying to breathe quietly. The corridor was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The woman pressed herself against the wall, arms wrapped around a brown leather folder. The man in the expensive suit stood 3 feet away, palm outstretched, demanding something. But it was the third person that made George's stomach drop. A security guard. Standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching, not intervening, not helping. Just watching. George recognized him immediately. Davis, the day shift supervisor. What was he doing here at 11 at night? And why wasn't he stopping this? The woman's voice finally broke through clearly. You can't do this. People will know. They'll find out. The man in the suit stepped closer. No one will find out anything if you're smart. Give me the folder, Rebecca. Walk away. Forget this happened. Rebecca. George knew that name. Rebecca Chen. She worked in accounting. Quiet woman. Always polite. She'd thanked him once for cleaning her office during a late night when she'd stayed behind to finish reports. Now she looked nothing like that calm, collected person. Now she looked hunted. I've already made copies, Rebecca said, voice shaking but defiant. If anything happens to me, they go straight to the board and the FBI. The man's face darkened. You're making a mistake. A big one. Davis, the security guard, finally spoke. His voice was flat, emotionless. We can make this easy or hard, Rebecca. Your choice. George felt sick. Davis wasn't there to protect her. He was part of this. Whatever this was, Rebecca clutched the folder tighter. I trusted you. I trusted this company. I thought I was doing the right thing by bringing this to you privately, Mr. Harmon, but you're just going to cover it up. You're all covering it up. Harmon. George's mind raced. Richard Harmon, Chief Financial Officer. One of the most powerful men in the company. George had seen his face on the lobby monitors, smiling in corporate videos about integrity and transparency. Now that same face looked cold, calculating. Rebecca, listen to me, Harmon said, switching to a softer tone. You're upset. You're confused. The numbers you think you found, they're not what they seem. You've misunderstood the accounting structure. These things are complex. Let me explain them to you properly. Rebecca shook her head. I'm a senior auditor. I've been doing this for 8 years. I know fraud when I see it. $23 million, Richard. $23 million that doesn't exist anymore. And you signed off on every transfer. George's breath caught. 23 million. Fraud. This wasn't just an argument. This was a crime. And he was recording it. Harmon's fake sympathy evaporated. Give me the folder now. No. Davis pushed off the wall and took a step toward Rebecca. She flinched but held her ground. I walk out of here with this folder, or everyone knows. Those are the only two options. There's a third option, Harmon said quietly. Too quietly. The kind of quiet that made George's skin crawl. Davis pulled something from his belt. At first, George thought it was a flashlight. Then he saw the shape more clearly. A taser. Davis held it loosely, not threatening yet, but the message was clear. Rebecca's eyes widened. You wouldn't. There are cameras everywhere in this building. Davis smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Not in the service corridors. That's why we brought you here. No cameras. No witnesses. George's heart hammered against his ribs. He had to do something. Call the police. Run for help. But his legs wouldn't move. And if he moved now, they'd hear the door. They'd know someone was watching. Last chance, Harmon said. The folder. Or we do this the hard way, and trust me, you don't want that. You'll wake up in a hospital with no memory of tonight and no folder. We'll say you had an accident. Fell down the stairs. Hit your head. Tragic, really. And we'll be very sorry about it. Rebecca's defiance cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But she didn't move. I have a daughter. She's 7. If something happens to me, she'll know it wasn't an accident. My husband will know. You can't just make me disappear. We're not making you disappear, Harmon said. We're giving you a choice. A generous one. Take the severance package. 6-month salary. Sign the NDA. Walk away. Your daughter gets to keep her mother. You get to keep your life. The taser in Davis's hand hummed to life. Blue electricity crackled between the prongs. Rebecca flinched at the sound. George's thumb moved without thinking. He zoomed in slightly, making sure the phone captured Davis's face clearly, then Harmon's, and Rebecca's terrified expression. His mind screamed at him to run, to hide, to pretend he'd never seen this. But something deeper, something stubborn, kept him recording. Because if he didn't, who would save Rebecca? And if no one saved her tonight, how many others would Harmon destroy tomorrow? The taser's electric hum filled the corridor. Rebecca's back pressed harder against the wall, like she could disappear into it if she pushed hard enough. The leather folder shook in her grip. George's mind raced. He had maybe 30 seconds before this turned violent. Davis was already moving closer, taser raised. Harmon watched with cold patience, hands in his pockets, like he was waiting for a business meeting to start. George did the only thing he could think of. He knocked. 3 sharp raps on the stairwell door. The sound echoed like gunshots in the concrete space. All 3 heads snapped toward the door, toward him. George's blood turned to ice. Stupid. That was so stupid. Now they knew someone was there. Now they'd come looking. He had seconds to move. He bolted down the stairs, shoes slapping against concrete, phone clutched in his sweating hand. Behind him, he heard the door burst open. Heavy footsteps, Davis shouting something. George didn't stop to listen. He flew down to flights, lungs burning, and crashed through the exit into the 3rd-floor hallway. The corporate floor. Executive offices. Glass walls and marble floors. Nowhere to hide. George ran anyway. His cleaning cart was still by the elevators where he'd left it. He dove behind it, crouching low, trying to control his breathing, trying to think. The stairwell door banged open. Davis emerged, taser still in hand, head swiveling. George pressed himself against the wall, making himself as small as possible. Davis walked slowly down the hallway, boots squeaking on the polished floor, checking offices, looking behind desks. George could see him through the gap between the cart and the wall, getting closer. 20 feet, 15, 10. George's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text notification. The sound was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the building, it was deafening. Davis froze. His head turned slowly toward the cleaning cart. George didn't wait. He burst from his hiding spot and ran for the emergency exit on the opposite side of the floor. Davis shouted behind him. Footsteps pounding, gaining. George hit the exit door at full speed, nearly falling down the stairs on the other side. He caught himself on the railing and kept going down toward the ground floor, toward the main exit, toward safety. But then he stopped, his feet planted on the 2nd-floor landing. His chest heaved. His mind cleared just enough to think past the panic. Rebecca, she was still up there, alone with Harmon. If George ran now, if he left the building, what would happen to her? Would they hurt her? Would they do worse? And the video... George pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The recording was still going. 7 minutes of footage. Clear audio. Clear video. Faces. Names. Threats. A taser. Everything. This was evidence. Real evidence. But only if someone saw it. Only if it mattered. Davis's footsteps echoed above him, searching, getting closer. George had maybe a minute before Davis checked this stairwell. He had to decide now. He opened his phone's messaging app. His sister's number sat at the top of his recent contacts. George's fingers flew across the screen, typing faster than he'd ever typed before. Jenny, emergency, don't call. Just listen. I'm sending you a video. If something happens to me, send it to the police. Send it to the news. Send it everywhere. Woman's name is Rebecca Chen. Building is Hamilton Financial Tower. 5th-floor service corridor. Security guard named Davis and CFO Richard Harmon threatening her. This is real. I'm not joking. If you don't hear from me in 1 hour, send everything. He attached the video file. Hit send. Watch the progress bar crawl across the screen. 50%. 60%. 70%. The stairwell door above him banged open. Davis was in the stairwell now. Coming down. George could hear him checking each landing, methodical, patient. A hunter who knew his prey was trapped. 80%. 90%. George held his breath. The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Come on, St. George exhaled. Whatever happened now, the evidence was safe. Someone else had it. The truth couldn't die even if he did, but he wasn't planning to die tonight. George pocketed his phone and started moving down again. Faster now, quieter. He reached the ground floor and pressed his ear against the exit door. Silence on the other side. He cracked it open. The main lobby stretched before him, empty. The front doors were 50 feet away. Glass doors? Freedom. He could make it. But then George thought about Rebecca again. About her 7-year-old daughter. About her husband. About the folder she was clutching like a lifeline. If he left now, Harmon would take that folder. Would threaten her into silence. Would make her sign papers that buried everything. And in 6 months, maybe a year, maybe longer, Harmon would do this to someone else. And next time, there might not be a janitor with a phone in a stairwell. George let the door close. He turned around and started climbing back up the stairs. His legs were jelly. His hands still shook. But his mind was clear now. Crystal clear he wasn't running. He was going back. Back to that corridor. Back to Rebecca. And this time, he wasn't hiding behind a door. This time, Davis and Harmon would see him coming. George reached the 4th floor and pulled out his phone again. He opened the camera. Started a new recording. Then he pushed through the door into the corridor. The lights were brighter here. He walked quickly, deliberately, making noise, making sure they'd hear him, making sure they'd see him, making sure that whatever happened next, it was all on camera, all documented, all real. George turned the corner toward the service corridor entrance. The door was still open. He could see them inside. Harmon had Rebecca by the arm now. Davis stood close, taser ready. Rebecca's face was streaked with tears, but she still held the folder. Still fighting, George raised his phone higher. The camera light flicked on, bright and unmistakable. All 3 of them turned toward him. Shock registered on their faces. Then anger, then fear. George's voice didn't shake when he spoke. Let her go. Right now. Or this video goes viral in the next 60 seconds. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. George stood in the corridor entrance, phone raised, camera recording. Harmon's hand was still on Rebecca's arm. Davis's taser was still active, crackling with blue electricity. Rebecca stared at George like he was a ghost. Then Harmon smiled. It was the most terrifying thing George had ever seen. Cold, calculated, not worried at all.
How are you?
You must be the janitor, Harmon said calmly. George, isn't it? I've seen you around. You do good work. Very thorough. George kept the camera steady, pointing directly at Harmon's face. I said, let her go. Davis took a step toward. Put the phone down now. Can't do that, George said. His voice was stronger than he felt. I already sent 1 video to my sister. She's got instructions. Anything happens to me, it goes to the police. Goes to the news. Goes everywhere. Harmon's smile twitched. Just slightly. Just enough to show George had landed a hit. Very clever, Harmon said. He released Rebecca's arm, but didn't step back. But you don't understand what you're involved in here. This is a private business matter. A misunderstanding between the company and an employee. Nothing more. Looked like a lot more than that, George said. He gestured toward Davis with his chin. Since when do misunderstandings involve tasers? Davis's jaw clenched. He lowered the taser, but didn't put it away. You're making a big mistake. Maybe George agreed. But at least it'll be on camera. Rebecca found her voice. It was small, shaky, but determined. George, you need to leave. They'll hurt you. They'll destroy you. Just go, please. George shook his head, eyes never leaving Harmon. Not without you. Harmon sighed, like this was all very tiresome. He straightened his tie, composing himself. All right, Let's all calm down and be reasonable. George, you seem like a smart man, a practical man. So let me explain something to you. Started walking slowly toward George. Not aggressive, just casual, like they were having a conversation at a coffee shop. You work hard. You have for years. 12 years, if I remember correctly. You're reliable. You show up on time. You do your job. But you make what? 38,000 a year? Maybe 40 with overtime? George said nothing. Kept recording. That's not a lot of money, Harmon continued. Not for 12 years of loyalty. Not for someone who clearly has integrity. Who does the right thing. I respect that. I do. He was 10 feet away now. Then 8. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this simple. You delete that video. You walk out of this building. You forget everything you saw tonight. And tomorrow, you'll find a very generous severance package waiting for you. $200,000, tax-free, in an offshore account? Completely untraceable, Rebecca gasped. George's hand tightened on the phone. 200,000, Harmon repeated. For one deleted video. For one night of selective memory. That's a lot of money for a janitor, George. That's a house. That's your daughter's college fund. That's a new life.
Ow.
George's heart stuttered. How did Harmon know about his daughter? How did he know anything about George's life? Harmon saw the reaction and smiled again. I know everything about everyone in this building. It's my job. Your daughter. Emily, right? 16 years old? Smart kid. Applying to colleges next year. I bet she'd love to go somewhere nice. Somewhere prestigious. Somewhere expensive. The threat was subtle but clear. Harmon knew where George lived. Knew his family. Could reach them anytime he wanted, so what do you say? Harmon extended his hand. 200,000. Clean break. Everyone walks away happy. George looked at that outstretched hand. He thought about Emily. About how hard they'd worked to save money for her education. About the scholarships they were hoping for. The student loans they were dreading. 200,000 would change everything. But then George looked at Rebecca. At her tear-stained face. At the leather folder she was clutching. At the fear in her eyes. He thought about her 7-year-old daughter. About what would happen if Rebecca disappeared. About who Harmon would threaten next. George lowered his phone slightly. Harmon's smile widened. Then George raised it again and took 3 steps backward, putting distance between himself and Harmon. No deal. The smile vanished. I'm sorry. I said no, George repeated. You're not buying this video. You're not buying my silence. And you're definitely not threatening my daughter. Harmon. Harmon's face darkened. You're making a very foolish choice. Maybe, George said. But it's mine to make. Davis moved fast. Faster than George expected. The security guard closed the distance in 2 long strides and grabbed for the phone. George twisted away, but Davis was bigger, stronger. His hand clamped around George's wrist. The phone started to slip. Rebecca screamed. She dropped the leather folder and charged at Davis, clawing at his arm, trying to break his grip. Davis shoved her backward with his free hand. She stumbled, hit the wall, slid down. George fought desperately to keep hold of his phone. Davis squeezed harder, grinding the bones in George's wrist. Pain shot up his arm. His fingers started to go numb. Davis, that's enough. The voice came from behind them. Sharp. Authoritative. Male. Everyone froze. George looked toward the voice. A man stood at the corridor entrance. Older, maybe 60, wearing a security uniform. But not like Davis's uniform. This one had more badges. More authority. A name tag read, Chief Morrison. Davis released George's wrist immediately and stepped back. Chief, I can explain. Save it. Morrison walked into the corridor, taking in the scene. The taser in Davis's hand. Rebecca on the floor. George clutching his phone. Harmon trying to look innocent. Morrison's face was stone. I got a very interesting call 10 minutes ago. Anonymous tip. Said there was a situation on the 5th floor. Thought I'd check it out myself. Harmon recovered quickly. Tom, thank God you're here. This man attacked Davis. We were trying to stop talking. Morrison's voice could have cut glass. He looked at George. You recording this? George nodded, not trusting his voice. Good. Keep recording. Morrison turned to Rebecca. Ma'am, are you hurt? Rebecca shook her head, still stunned. Morrison pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Chief Morrison. I need police at Hamilton Financial Tower immediately. 5th floor service corridor. We have a situation involving assault, threats, and possible corporate fraud. Send multiple units. And call the FBI. Davis went pale. Harmon's mask finally cracked. Tom, you don't know what you're doing. You don't understand. I understand plenty, Morrison said coldly. I understand I've got an employee with a taser threatening an auditor. I've got a CFO in a corridor where he has no business being at 11 p.m. And I've got a janitor who is brave enough to film it all. He looked at George with something like respect. That anonymous tip. It came with a video attachment. Already watched it. Already forwarded it to my captain. Already sent copies to my personal email. So whatever happens here tonight, that evidence is safe. Multiple places. Multiple people. George's knees nearly gave out with relief. Jenny, his sister, must have called someone. Must have sent the video. She'd saved him. Morrison stepped closer to Davis. Badge, gun, taser now. Davis didn't move. His eyes flicked to Harmon. Waiting for orders? Hoping for a miracle? But Harmon's miracle had just run out. The police arrived 6 minutes later. For officers, then 2 more. Then detectives. Then someone in a dark suit who flashed an FBI badge and asked everyone to stay exactly where they were. George sat on the floor of the corridor. Back against the wall, phone still in his hand. His wrist throbbed where Davis had grabbed him. His heart was still racing. But he was alive. Rebecca was alive. And the cavalry had arrived. Rebecca sat a few feet away. The leather folder back in her lap, arms wrapped around it protectively. She hadn't said much since Morrison had called it in. Just sat there, shaking, tears streaming silently down her face. But she was safe now. That's what mattered. Davis stood in handcuffs near the elevator, face blank, saying nothing. His taser had been bagged as evidence. His badge was clipped to Chief Morrison's belt. His career was over. He had to know that. But he still wasn't talking. Still wasn't giving anything up. Harmon, on the other hand, wouldn't shut up. He'd spent the last 5 minutes trying to charm the detectives. Explaining this was all a misunderstanding. That he was just having a conversation with an employee. That the janitor had misinterpreted everything. That this was ridiculous that he had lawyers. That he had connections. That this would all be cleared up by morning. The FBI agent let him talk. Took notes. Smiled politely. Said nothing. A female detective crouched down next to George. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice. Mr. Reeves, I'm Detective Sarah Park. I need to ask you some questions. George nodded. Okay. You filmed the incident? Yes. All of it. And you sent the video to your sister? Yes. Jenny Reeves. She lives in Portland. I told her if I didn't contact her in an hour, send it to the police. Detective Park smiled slightly. Smart thinking. She actually called 911 about 15 minutes after you sent it. Didn't wait the full hour. Probably saved your life. George's throat tightened. His little sister. Always looking out for him, even when he did something stupid like confront corrupt executives in empty buildings. I'm going to need your phone, Detective Park said gently. For evidence? We'll get it back to you as soon as possible. But right now it's the most important piece of evidence we have. George handed it over without hesitation. There's another video on there. The first one I took. Before I knocked on the door. It's got everything. The threats. The taser. Harmon grabbing Rebecca. Davis admitting there are no cameras in the service corridors. Park's eyebrows rose. You got that on camera? Every word. She stood up, slipping the phone into an evidence bag. Mr. Reeves, you did a very brave thing tonight. Also very stupid, but mostly brave. George laughed despite himself. Yeah, I'm starting to realize the stupid part. Another detective was talking to Rebecca now, carefully taking the leather folder from her hands. She let it go reluctantly, like she was handing over a piece of her soul. The detective opened it carefully, scanning the documents inside. His expression shifted from professional interest to shock to barely contained anger. "Detective Park," he called. "You need to see this." Park walked over, looked at the documents, whispered something to her partner. Then both of them looked at Harmon with expressions that could freeze fire. The FBI agent joined them. More whispered conversation. More documents passed between hands. More grim faces. Finally, the FBI agent walked over to Harmon. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Special Agent Rodriguez. I'm going to need you to come with me." Harmon's confident smile finally cracked. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet," Rodriguez said. "But we have a lot of questions about some financial transactions, and about witness intimidation, and about conspiracy. I suggest you call your lawyer now, because you're going to need one." Harmon's face went white. For the first time all night, he looked scared. Really scared. "I want to speak to my attorney." "I'm not saying anything else without my attorney present." "That's your right," Rodriguez agreed. He gestured to one of the officers. "Take him down to the station. Separate car from Davis. Don't let them talk." They led Harmon away. He looked back at George. The mask was completely gone now. Just rage and fear and hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," Harmon hissed. "No idea what you've started. This doesn't end here." George met his eyes, didn't look away, didn't flinch. "Good. I hope it doesn't." He took Harmon away. The corridor finally started to empty. Just George, Rebecca, Morrison, and a couple of officers taking photos of the scene. George watched them work, feeling strangely numb, like this was all happening to someone else. Chief Morrison sat down next to him. "Hell of a night." "Yeah," George said. "That tip I got. The anonymous one. That was smart. Having backup already in motion before you confronted them." George blinked. "What?" "No, I didn't." Morrison held up a hand. "I know you didn't. Your sister did. She didn't just send the video to 911. She sent it to my personal email, too. Found it in the company directory, told me to check the 5th floor. Told me to hurry." Paused. "If she hadn't done that, if I'd been even 2 minutes later, things might have gone very differently." George's eyes burned. He'd have to call Jenny. Thank her. Maybe yell at her for not waiting the full hour. Definitely hug her the next time he saw her. "You're a good man, George," Morrison said quietly. "Not many people would have done what you did. Most would have walked away. Pretended they saw nothing. Can't say I'd blame them. I couldn't just leave her," George said, looking at Rebecca. She was talking to Detective Park now, voice stronger, more steady. Starting to come back to herself, she needed help. "So I helped." Morrison nodded. "World needs more people like you." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Morrison stood up, extending a hand to help George to his feet. "Come on, let's get you out of here. Detectives will need a full statement, but that can wait until tomorrow. You've been through enough tonight." George let Morrison pull him up. His legs were shaky, but they held. He'd made it. They'd all made it. As they walked toward the elevator, Rebecca called out, "George, wait." He turned. She crossed the corridor quickly and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. You've saved my life." "How?" George hugged her back, awkward but genuine. "You saved your own life." "I just filmed it." She pulled back, tears on her cheeks again, but these ones were different. Relief, gratitude, hope. "My daughter gets to see me tomorrow because of you." "I get to go home because of you. I'll never forget that." George didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Rebecca smiled through her tears. "I owe you everything." "You don't owe me anything," George said. "Just make sure that folder counts. Make sure all this meant something." "It will," Rebecca promised. $23 million. 57 falsified transactions, Evidence of money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. This brings down more than just Harmon. This brings down half the executive team. George's eyes widened. Half the executive team? This was bigger than he'd thought. So much bigger. Detective Park appeared at Rebecca's shoulder. "Mrs. Chen, we're ready to take your statement now." Rebecca squeezed George's hand once more, then followed the detective back toward the offices. George watched her go, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, purpose, like maybe his life actually mattered. Morrison guided him to the elevator. As the doors closed, George caught one last glimpse of the service corridor. The scene of the crime. The place where everything had changed. Where he'd stopped being invisible and became someone who mattered. The elevator descended. George closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Statements. Lawyers. Maybe testimony. Maybe threats. Maybe worse. But tonight, he'd won. Tonight, the janitor had become a hero. 3 months later, George stood outside the federal courthouse in a suit he'd borrowed from his brother. It didn't fit quite right. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders too tight. But it was clean and professional, and that's what mattered. The media had been calling it the Hamilton financial scandal. $23 million in fraudulent transactions, 7 executives arrested. Dozens more under investigation. The company's stock had crashed. The board had resigned. The whole thing was a mess. A beautiful, necessary mess. And it had all started with a janitor and a cell phone. George's testimony had been crucial. The videos he'd recorded became Exhibit A and Exhibit B in the federal case. Every news station had played clips. Harmon's threats, Davis's taser, Rebecca's terrified face. George's steady voice saying, "Let her go." It had all become public. All become real. The trial had lasted 6 weeks. George had testified for 3 days. Harmon's lawyers had tried everything. Questioned his character. Suggested he'd doctored the videos. Implied he was working with Rebecca to blackmail the company. But the evidence didn't lie. The timestamps didn't lie. The metadata didn't lie. The jury had deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Harmon would spend the next 15 years in federal prison. Davis got 7. 3 other executives were awaiting their own trials. The dominoes were still falling. George had watched it all from the witness box. Then from the gallery, then from his living room as the news covered every development. It felt surreal, like it had happened to someone else. But the bruise on his wrist where Davis had grabbed him was real. The nightmares were real. The fear that someone might come after him or his family was real. But so was the pride. So was the knowledge that he'd done the right thing. Rebecca came out of the courthouse now, surrounded by her legal team. She looked different than that terrified woman in the corridor. Stronger, confident. She'd become the star witness. Walking the jury through every fraudulent transaction, every falsified document, every lie. Her testimony had been devastating. Professional, unshakable. She saw George and broke away from her lawyers. Walking over with a smile. "You came, wouldn't miss it," George said. "The verdict's in on the other executives," Rebecca said. 3 more guilty verdicts. 2 more trials pending. "It's really over, George." "We did it." "You did it," George corrected. "You're the one who found the fraud. You're the one who had the courage to confront them. I just happened to be there with a camera." Rebecca shook her head. "You were there when it mattered. That's everything." They stood together in the autumn sunshine, watching reporters rush past, chasing lawyers and prosecutors for quotes. It was chaos. Beautiful chaos. "What are you going to do now?" George asked. Rebecca smiled. "I got a job offer. FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They want me to help investigate corporate fraud. Apparently I have a talent for it." George laughed. "That's amazing. What about you?" Rebecca asked. "I heard you got offers too." 3 different security consulting firms wanted to hire him. 2 news networks wanted him to work as a commentator on corporate crime. 1 publisher wanted him to write a book. It was overwhelming, flattering, terrifying. I don't know, George admitted. I'm still just a janitor. I'm not sure I'm qualified for any of that. You're not just a janitor, Rebecca said firmly. You never were. You're someone who does the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. That's more valuable than any degree or certification. George felt his throat tighten. I'm thinking about going back to school, get my degree, maybe study criminal justice, maybe become an investigator myself. I don't know. I'm 52. Feels late to start over. It's never too late, Rebecca said. Look at me. I'm 41, and I'm about to start my life over too. We both are. A little girl came running out of the courthouse. 7 years old. Bright red backpack. Gap-toothed smile. Rebecca's daughter. She crashed into her mother's arms. Rebecca caught her, spinning her around, both of them laughing. Is it over, Mommy? The little girl asked. It's over, sweetie, Rebecca said. All done. We can go home now. The little girl looked at George. Are you the man who saved my mommy? George crouched down to her level. Your mommy saved herself. I just helped a little bit. It's not what Mommy says. She says, you're a hero. George's eyes met Rebecca's. She smiled, eyes shining. That's exactly what I say. The little girl threw her arms around George's neck in a hug. He froze, surprised, then hugged her back gently. When she pulled away, she whispered, Thank you for keeping my mommy safe.
Ow.
George couldn't speak, just nodded. The little girl grabbed her mother's hand and they walked away, toward a new life, a safe life. A life where the bad guys were finally behind bars. Morrison appeared at George's shoulder. The security chief had testified to his anonymous tip, his quick response, his integrity. The FBI had commended him. The company had promoted him. He'd become one of the heroes of the story. You doing okay? Morrison asked. Oh, yeah, George said. I think I am. Good, because I've got something for you. Morrison handed him an envelope. Open it. George opened it carefully. Inside was a check, $50,000, and a letter from the FBI's whistleblower reward program. They're giving you a percentage of what they recovered, Morrison explained. Could be more later once they liquidate all the assets. But this is just the start. $50,000? More money than George had ever seen at once. More than enough to get Emily through her first year of college. More than enough to fix the car, pay off some debt, maybe even take a vacation, or something else, Morrison said. He pulled out another envelope. Job offer. Director of Security Training for a consulting firm. They want you to travel around teaching security personnel how to recognize corporate crime, how to do the right thing, how to be brave when it matters. George stared at the envelope. Me? Teaching? You've got the most important qualification, Morrison said. You lived it. You survived it. You won. People need to hear your story. They need to know that doing the right thing actually matters. George opened the envelope. Read the offer. The salary made his head spin. Benefits. Travel. Respect. A career, not just a job. Think about it, Morrison said. No pressure. But the offer's real. And I think you'd be amazing at it. Morrison clapped him on the shoulder and walked away, leaving George alone with 2 envelopes and a decision that would change his life. George's phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Dad, are you famous? My friends are saying you're all over the news. George smiled and typed back. Not famous. Just did my job. Another text came through. This one from Jenny. I'm so proud of you, big brother. Mom and Dad would be too. George's eyes burned. His parents had passed away years ago, but Jenny was right. They would have been proud. Proud that he'd stood up. Proud that he'd helped someone. Proud that he hadn't run away when things got hard. A reporter approached, microphone extended. Mr. Reeves? Can we get a statement? What do you say to people who call you a hero? George looked at the camera. At the red recording light, at his own reflection in the lens. He thought about Rebecca and her daughter, about Morrison and his integrity, about Jenny and her quick thinking, about Emily and her future, about all the people who'd helped him along the way. "I'm not a hero," George said clearly. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and did something about it. Anyone could have done the same thing. Anyone should do the same thing. We all have phones. We all have voices. We all have choices. When you see something wrong, don't look away. Don't stay silent. Do something. Anything. Because that's how things change. That's how bad people lose. That's how good wins." The reporter smiled. "That's a powerful message. It's the only message that matters," George said. He walked away from the courthouse, leaving the reporters and cameras behind. The sun was setting now, painting the sky orange and pink. It's beautiful, hopeful, new. George pulled out his phone and called Emily. She answered on the second ring. "Dad? Hey, sweetheart. You free for dinner? I've got some news." "Some big news? Good news?" George smiled, looking at the 2 envelopes in his hand. At the future they represented. At the choice he'd already made in his heart. "Yeah," he said. "Really good news? I'll tell you all about it," as he walked toward his car. George thought about that night in the corridor. About the choice he'd made to stay instead of run. About the phone in his hand and the courage in his heart. About how one person with a camera and conscience could change everything. The guard who appeared in the frame had changed everything. But not in the way anyone expected. Because the real guard, the real hero, wasn't Morrison or Davis or anyone in uniform. It was a janitor who refused to look away, who refused to be silent, who refused to let evil win. And that made all the difference.